A chilling whisper from a little girl changed everything. What dark secret did she uncover that made police dig beneath her own home? Dad isn't dead. He's under the floor, the little girl said. Police started digging. Chief Mark Rivers looked up at the incident report that had just been handed to him. Name of the reporting party, Martha Grant. Content, missing husband. No trace, no additional notes. But what caught his attention was that the person who came to file the report wasn't Martha. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Frances Davis. And with her, a 4-year-old girl tightly clutching a teddy bear, her face pale as a sheet. She didn't want me to take the little girl anywhere, Frances said, her voice urgent. But the girl said something strange. You need to hear it. Mark sat down, his expression softening as he looked toward Anna. What's your name, sweetheart? I'm Anna, the girl replied, her voice barely a whisper. Do you know where your daddy went? He asked gently. Anna didn't answer right away. She looked up, her large dark eyes trembling, then slowly said, Daddy is under the kitchen floor. The air in the room turned ice cold. Mark glanced at Frances. Her face had gone pale. A young officer nearby coughed quietly, trying to hide a shiver. What did you say? Mark leaned in, his tone no longer gentle, but cautious. A child's words froze the room. Could a 4-year-old really hold the key to a crime no one else suspected? Daddy's under the kitchen floor, Anna repeated. Where the tiles are a lighter color. Daddy's really cold. An eerie silence fell over the room. Mark immediately signaled for Lieutenant Richard Monroe to step closer. Get Martha Grant to the station. Set up a preliminary investigation team. I want the scene checked within the hour. Less than 30 minutes later, Martha arrived, far more composed and dry-eyed than Mark had expected. She wore a white blouse and black pants, her hair neatly tied, eyes showing no sign of panic or grief. I've told you already, Martha said calmly. My husband Julian has a habit of disappearing for a few days without warning. This isn't the first time. You didn't find anything unusual about that? Mark asked, not taking his eyes off her. No, she said with a shrug. I figured he'd come back like he always does. Richard interjected, but neighbors said they heard arguing and things breaking that night. Martha glanced at him, then sighed. We had an argument. But who doesn't argue in a marriage? Mark nodded. And did you renovate the kitchen floor recently? Martha paused slightly. I retiled the floor because there was mold. I did it myself. You retiled it yourself? Mark asked, surprised. Yes, Martha replied quickly. I watched tutorials online. Richard pulled out a USB drive. Your neighbor, Mr. Ernest Morgan, has a security camera. He provided footage showing you carrying Anna out of the house around 3 a.m. and returning alone with a bag of construction materials. Care to explain? Martha bit her lip. I didn't want Anna to breathe in the mold. I took her to a friend's house. As for the materials, I wanted to fix the house myself. Mark raised an eyebrow. No receipt for the materials, no contractor, no official notice of repair. And the girl says her father is under the kitchen tiles. Quite the coincidence. Martha clenched her fists, her voice rising. Are you accusing me of killing my husband? Mark replied calmly, We're not accusing anyone. We're asking questions. And your answers don't seem to line up. Martha suddenly turned to Richard. You're an investigator, but do you know anything about an unhappy marriage? Do you know Julian used to hit me? Mark cut in. Do you have any proof? Medical records, hospital visits, police reports? Martha was silent for a few seconds, then exhaled sharply. I didn't go to the hospital. I endured it. Richard tilted his head slightly toward Mark and whispered, We need an emergency search warrant. The cement smell is still fresh, and her tone. Mark nodded. Start the paperwork. I want forensics there first thing in the morning. The next morning, officers arrived at the small house at the end of Maplewood Street. The lead forensic officer, Lisa Parker, a cold but seasoned professional, knelt down and sniffed the newly laid tiles. Cement still smells fresh, not fully dry. There's something underneath, she said, then turned to another technician. Start drilling at the color discrepant area. Martha was held in the living room, watched by 2 officers. Anna wasn't present. Frances had taken her to her grandmother's, as Mark had requested. Lisa pointed. We'll drill layer by layer. Start at the light-colored tiles. The whir of the drill echoed through the heavy air. About 30 minutes later, the first layer of tiles was removed. Beneath the gray mortar, a piece of dark fabric began to show. Lisa stopped a technician. Slow down. Use your hands for the rest. Wearing gloves, they gently cleared away the cement. A young officer gasped, "Oh my God." A human foot emerged, pale, blue, and stiff. Mark stepped forward, silent for a few moments, then turned to Martha. "Anything you'd like to say?" Martha didn't answer. She turned her face away. Lisa's voice was heavy. Male body, fully wrapped in fabric. Dried blood on the head. Blunt force trauma. Richard snapped photos of the scene, then crouched to pick up a small shattered object next to the body. It's a phone. Cracked, but we might recover data. Mark narrowed his eyes. Do it. Send it to tech. Another officer ran outside and vomited. Lisa didn't comment. Not everyone's built for death, she said. Mark looked at the body, eyes still open, fists clenched as if he'd struggled. He turned and glanced at the silent house, the curtains swaying in the light breeze. This isn't a disappearance, not an accident. This is a premeditated murder. He turned to Richard. Arrest Martha Grant. Hold her under Section 142, suspected murder and body disposal. Richard stepped forward and read her rights. Mrs. Martha Grant, you are under arrest for suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent. Silent? Martha scoffed bitterly. Do you know how many years I've lived in silence? Mark replied plainly, well, no one needs silence anymore. The clink of handcuffs echoed through the cement-dusted room. Martha didn't resist. She only glanced at the tiles, now removed, where her husband's body had just been uncovered, her gaze hollow, as if she had nothing left to hold on to. On the transport back to the detention center, Richard glanced in the rearview mirror. Martha sat motionless, like a statue. He thought to himself, some commit crimes in a fit of rage, but others, like Martha, seem to have orchestrated a full-blown tragedy. Back at the station, Mark called for an emergency meeting. Present were the forensics team, data recovery techs, and prosecutor Rose Martin, a sharp woman with eyes like blades. Lisa Parker spoke first. The victim, Julian Grant, died of blunt force trauma to the skull from behind. No signs of defensive wounds. No blood at the burial site, indicating the body was moved before being buried. Mark nodded. This was clearly premeditated murder. Rose folded her hands. But for a solid prosecution, we need all the puzzle pieces. Motive, timeline, physical evidence. The girl Anna is key, but a child's words aren't enough. We need more. A young tech officer, Stephen Harris, stood and presented. We're recovering data from the broken phone. Most of the memory is gone, but a few texts survived before it powered off. He projected them on the screen. A message thread between Julian and Martha appeared. Julian, Martha, I can't do this anymore. I'm filing for divorce next week. Martha, if you leave me, I'll make you disappear. Julian, don't be crazy. Think of Anna. Martha, Anna will be fine. Without you, she and I will live better. The room fell silent. Rose frowned. That's enough to prove motive. Mark signaled to Richard. Send the investigation team back to Martha's house. Look for property papers, loan documents, anything that shows financial motivation. 2 hours later, Richard returned with a box of documents. He pulled out a stack. This is the property deed. Julian was the sole owner. We found evidence Martha was trying to transfer ownership by claiming he was missing. He pulled out another bundle. These are loan receipts, nearly $240,000 borrowed from Julian under the pretext of a small personal business investment. No repayment made. Mark looked at Rose. Add financial motive to the threat. The scene, that's more than enough. Not done yet, Richard added. We discovered frequent private messages between Martha and a man named Samuel Brooks on social media. Mark tapped the table. I want to speak with that man. That afternoon, Samuel Brooks, a tall man with neatly combed hair and a dark shirt, was brought into the interrogation room. He looked nervous, eyes darting. How do you know Martha Grant? Rose asked directly. Samuel swallowed. We met in an investment group, talked online, met a few times. Were you romantically involved with her? Mark asked. Samuel hesitated. I had feelings, but nothing improper happened. She always said her husband was terrible, and she was tired of being controlled. Did she ever talk about hurting him? Richard asked. Samuel took a deep breath. One time she said, I wish he would just disappear, but I thought it was just venting. Rose repeated the words. Do you think Martha is impulsive? Samuel fell silent. No, she's more calculated than I thought. Meanwhile, at the home of Carol, Julian's mother, little Anna was sitting by the window, drawing. Carol placed a glass of milk beside her. What are you drawing, sweetheart? She asked gently. Anna pointed at the paper, a human figure lying beneath a tiled floor, surrounded by stacked tiles. It's Daddy. He's under there. Carol gripped the edge of the table, her voice trembling. Who told you about that? I heard it, Anna said, still focused on her drawing. Mommy had a big pan. Daddy said don't. And she hit him hard. Then Daddy stopped talking. Carol shuddered, trying to stay calm. And then what? Mommy said, don't tell anyone. If you do, our family will fall apart. Carol buried her face in her hands, tears flowing down her cheeks. In the interrogation room, Rose concluded, Martha didn't just kill someone. She staged a fake home repair, created a false alibi by removing the child, and coached the girl into silence. That makes this crime even more severe. Mark nodded. I'll recommend charges for premeditated murder, concealment of a body, and manipulating a minor into withholding testimony. She must face the full consequences, Richard added. Not just for Julian, but for Anna. That child has been living in lies and violence since the age of 4. Rose checked her watch. Prepare for the preliminary hearing. I want every piece of evidence organized. And remember, Anna's words may not be admissible as formal testimony, but they are the emotional linchpin. Mark stood up, his voice somber. We're not just seeking justice for the dead. We're trying to save a living soul, one already scarred. On the way back to Carol's house, Frances asked softly, Do you think Anna really understands everything? Carol shook her head, her eyes red. She's just a child. But the saddest thing is when a child understands too much, and no one lets her speak. Frances choked up. I've never seen a child so calm, yet so full of pain. When Anna said, Daddy's cold, I got chills. Carol squeezed Frances's hand. I'll protect that child no matter what. That evening, Mark reviewed the case file. He opened a photo of Anna drawing by the window, her face unnaturally serious for her age. He sighed. Some people bury a body after killing, he murmured. Some bury their child's entire childhood. He looked out the station window, the dim glow of night spilling over Maplewood Street. Tomorrow, the case would officially move into prosecution. The cement had dried, but the blood would never disappear. The next morning, under the biting cold sunlight of suburban Illinois, the forensic team and tactical police gathered around the house at 17 Maplewood Street. Once a quiet residence, the house was now surrounded by yellow tape, curious neighbors whispering behind curtains, and a line of service vehicles parked along the narrow street. Lisa Parker, the lead forensic investigator, adjusted her rubber gloves, her steely eyes scanning the kitchen floor. She signaled 2 team members to begin drilling through the newly tiled area. Part of the floor had been examined the previous day, but this time they would demolish the entire 40 centimeters thick cement base at the exact location Anna had pointed out. The saw whined sharply. Pale tiles shattered into shards. A harsh, acrid odor began to rise from beneath, thickening the air. Detective Richard Monroe wrinkled his nose, took a step back. Decomposition smell, Lisa confirmed, her voice even, unflinching. Everyone step back. Hazmat team, move in. Forensic tech Thomas Daniels slid a crowbar into the cement's edge. Within 10 minutes, damp earth started to appear beneath. Careful, Lisa warned. We have signs of a buried object. Dig by hand. The scratching of small shovels echoed in the silence. Layer by layer, fine dirt was lifted out. Sweat beaded down Thomas's face, even though it was only about 65 degrees Fahrenheit inside the house. Suddenly, he froze, his hand trembling. Something's here. I touched fabric. Lisa immediately leaned down, shining her flashlight onto the soil. Stop. Clear the surrounding dirt gently. Everyone seemed to hold their breath. After nearly 10 minutes of careful excavation, the edge of a large burlap sack appeared, dark, crumpled, and blotched with deep red stains resembling dried blood. Richard stepped back, hand instinctively resting on his holstered gun, though he knew nothing alive remained beneath that earth. Get a fabric sample. Open the bag, Lisa said, her voice low but firm. As the zipper was pulled open, a wave of putrid air burst out. Thomas turned and vomited violently into the kitchen corner. Another officer clamped a hand over his mouth, face pale. Inside the bag, a man's body lay curled tightly, forced into the narrow space. His head was soaked in dried blood, with a deep depression at the temple, clear signs of a blunt object strike from behind. Mark entered, stopping dead as he saw the victim's face, distorted by decay, yet still unmistakable. Julian Grant. The girl was right. Richard stepped forward, his hand shaking as he snapped photos of the scene, fighting off nausea. Lisa pulled out a small pouch next to the body. Another piece of evidence. A broken phone. Send it to TAC. Recover everything, Mark ordered, eyes locked on the corpse. Lisa nodded. The body has been dead at least 72 hours. No restraints. Fatal blow to the head, consistent with a sudden strike from behind. Blood pooled on the back and collar indicates he was attacked while standing, then fell and was bagged. Richard jotted down notes. So Julian never had a chance to fight back. Death was quick. Lisa added, no defensive wounds on the hands. Left hand still clenched, likely a final reflex before losing consciousness. Another forensic tech, James Morgan, quietly peeled back the rest of the burlap. He shuddered upon seeing a digital watch still strapped to the corpse's wrist. The screen was cracked, but the hands were frozen at 2:42 a.m. Could be time of death, Lisa whispered. Matches the camera footage of Martha leaving the house with Anna. Mark turned to Richard. Call Rose. Tell her to prepare the indictment file. This is a clear-cut murder case. Nothing left to debate. At the central holding facility, Martha Grant sat on a narrow metal bed, eyes blank as she stared through the small barred window. When the door opened, Rose Martin stepped in, holding a thick case file. Do you have anything to say? Rose asked bluntly. No, Martha replied, her voice hollow. We've excavated the kitchen floor. Julian's body was there. A dark fabric sack, blood, the blow, a phone, a broken watch that stopped the moment you took your daughter outside. Nothing to add? Martha gave a faint, bitter smile. I guess you're happy to be right. Rose leaned forward. I don't need to be right. I need the truth. And you need to decide if you're a murderer or a victim. Martha didn't respond. She stood and slowly began pacing her cell without turning around. She said, Julian said he was leaving me. He said he'd take Anna. I couldn't let that happen. Rose narrowed her eyes. You're admitting you killed your husband. Martha stayed silent. You planned everything, pretending to take your daughter away as an alibi, buying materials to redo the floor that same night. This wasn't rage. It was calculated. He drove me mad, Martha whispered. I felt like a ghost. If I hadn't struck first, I would have disappeared. Rose's voice turned cold. You could have divorced him. You could have reported him. But instead, you chose murder and buried him under the very floor where your daughter plays every morning. Martha clenched her fists, her voice sharp. I don't regret it. In the digital forensics room, technician Stephen Harris sat by the computer, eyes fixed on the screen. A short video clip had just been extracted from the damaged phone. Only 38 seconds long, but it was a priceless piece of evidence. Mark and Richard stood behind him. The screen displayed nighttime footage, seemingly from an internal camera placed high in the corner of the kitchen. In the video, Julian stood facing Martha, holding a small suitcase. Martha, I'm leaving. My lawyer will contact you in the morning, he said clearly. You're not going anywhere, Martha replied, her voice low. I don't want Anna to see this. Don't make things worse. Julian turned away. Martha picked up an object that appeared to be a cast iron pan and rushed toward him from behind. The video stopped at that exact moment. Stephen's voice trembled. That's all. That's the whole clip. Mark clenched his fists. We have everything we need. Now we wait for trial. That night, Carol held Anna in her arms. The child had fallen asleep after a nightmare, her hair soaked in cold sweat. Carol whispered, your dad will have his voice heard, and you will live as a child again, not as a witness to a crime. Outside, rain began to fall, light but cold. And beneath the floor tiles that had been removed, the kitchen now sat empty, but the memory of death remained, soaked into every tile, every seam of grout, like the last breath of a man betrayed. The official preliminary hearing took place in the regional courthouse of the state of Illinois. Inside, the air was so heavy it felt suffocating. Martha Grant was brought in, wearing a gray prison uniform, her hair no longer neatly styled like on the first day. Her eyes still held a trace of defiance, but also revealed fatigue and strain. On the opposite side was Prosecutor Rose Martin, face sharp and cold as usual. Beside her sat Detective Mark Rivers and Investigator Richard Monroe. On the public benches, Carol, mother of the victim, Julian, sat quietly, clutching the hand of her granddaughter, Anna, who sat obediently beside her. Rose began calmly, Mrs. Martha, today we are giving you the opportunity to state the full truth. This is your final chance to explain your actions. If not, the evidence is sufficient to proceed with a charge of first-degree murder. Martha gave a bitter smile. The truth? Since when do the ones wearing handcuffs get the privilege of telling their side of the story? Mark replied coldly, since the moment you picked up a cast iron pan and ended your husband's life. Since you turned your kitchen into a grave for the man your daughter called Dad. Martha glanced at Carol and Anna. Her eyes flickered for a moment but quickly returned to a steady calm. Julian wasn't the saint you all think he was. Richard raised an eyebrow. Explain. Martha licked her lips, then began speaking, each word measured and emotionless. When we first got married, Julian was gentle, kind. But later, he changed. He started controlling me, questioning every text, every social interaction. I quit my job at the cosmetic store because he said I dressed too flashy. I cut off friends because he said they were bad influences. Mark interjected, do you have any medical records? Evidence of psychological or physical abuse? No, Martha replied immediately. Because I never thought to report the man I once shared a bed with. I thought I could endure it for Anna. Rose raised a hand. But according to the notes from Julian's therapist, Dr. Fred Sanders, you were the one exhibiting controlling behavior. He wrote, Julian shows signs of distress from living with a wife who is impulsive, manipulative, and prone to depressive outbursts. He made that up, Martha said through clenched teeth. Then what about your messages to your former best friend, Laura Mitchell? Rose read aloud, if Julian leaves me, I'll make sure he never leaves anyone again. There's a way to silence someone forever if you stay cold enough. Martha clenched her fists. I was just venting. Mark stood, placing a piece of evidence on the table. This wasn't just venting. He pulled out the cast iron pan with dried blood on the rim. The blood matches Julian's DNA. This is the murder weapon, not a message. Martha lowered her head, but then she looked up, her voice dropping. Why don't you mention that Julian filed for divorce? That he was trying to take away my custody of Anna, that he wanted to kick me out of the house I helped build? What did you expect me to do? Richard snapped, no one forced you to kill. There are laws. Where were those laws when I cried every night? Martha whispered. Where were they when I begged him not to throw me away like trash? Rose spoke slowly. No one denies pain, but no amount of pain justifies burying a body under a kitchen floor. After the confrontation, the investigation team broadened their scope into Martha's personal relationships. Mark called in Laura Mitchell, Martha's former best friend, to clarify the threatening messages. Laura, a thin woman with curly hair and a distant voice, seemed hesitant at first. We used to be close, she said. Martha had a tendency to demand attention. She was quick to anger. Do you recall anything she said about Julian? Richard asked. Laura thought for a moment. Once she told me, I hate the way he looks at that girl, like she's his alone. If I lose Anna, I have nothing left. I thought it was just jealousy. Rose asked, do you think Martha is capable of murder? Laura was silent for a moment, then spoke quietly. I don't want to believe it. But when I heard Julian had gone missing, I wasn't surprised. I've seen that look in her eyes. It wasn't the look of someone sad. It was the look of someone who's made a decision. That night at Carol's home, Anna was playing with building blocks. She arranged small bricks into a square shape, placing a plastic figure in the middle. Carol sat quietly watching her granddaughter. What are you making, Anna? I'm building a bed for Daddy, the child replied. Like the one we had in our house before. Carol shivered. Daddy's not there anymore, sweetheart. He's in a better place now. No, he's not, Anna shook her head. He's still cold. I saw him shivering in my dream. Carol hugged her tightly. Daddy loved you very much. But now he needs you to be strong. He'll be happy if you're safe and loved. Anna looked up at her grandmother, her voice soft as the wind. Then does Mommy love me? Carol choked back a sob. Your mom did something very wrong. But you are not wrong, Anna. You are just a child, and you will be protected. At the detention center, Martha was visited by her defense attorney, Mr. Victor Anderson, a man in his 50s with graying hair, known for defending difficult cases. Victor spoke bluntly, Martha, I'm not here to help you deny the charges. But I can help you retain some dignity by cooperating and being honest. Dignity? Martha scoffed. I buried my dignity with Julian. Victor looked her in the eye. You have one last chance, so that your daughter doesn't have to grow up ashamed of your name. Martha said nothing, but for the first time, her eyes didn't look cold. They looked conflicted, maybe even regretful. The next morning, Rose submitted a report to the provincial court judge. Physical evidence, phone data, recovered video, witness testimony, and the crime scene all align. Martha Grant had motive, opportunity, and means. The act was premeditated, followed by staging the scene and coercing a child into silence. We officially request charges for first-degree murder with intent, along with body concealment and child witness manipulation. The judge nodded. Permission granted to continue detaining the defendant until the formal trial. Mark looked out the courthouse window as the early morning light spilled onto the street. But he didn't see hope in that light. He only saw the raw, unfiltered truth. A man died believing in love. A child lost her childhood witnessing her father's death. And a woman, perhaps once wounded, chose to wound others with her own hands. The child psychology clinic of Dr. Lucy Bennett sat quietly on the second floor of a red brick building in downtown Illinois. Carol held Anna's hand as they entered, her face tense despite her efforts to remain calm. Anna hadn't spoken a word all morning, simply clutching her old teddy bear, a birthday gift from Julian last year, and walking slowly. A nurse named Diana Johnson greeted them. "Hello, Mrs. Carroll. Can Anna come with me?" Carol looked at her granddaughter and gently nodded. "I'll be right outside, sweetheart." Anna didn't respond. She turned her face away but let Nurse Diana lead her in. The therapy room was colorful, one corner with a shelf of picture books, another with a dollhouse. Anna was invited to sit in a small chair across from Dr. Lucy Bennett, a woman in her 40s with light brown hair and comb eyes. "Your name is Anna, right?" Lucy asked, her voice as soft as a breeze. Anna nodded. "Do you like drawing?" Anna nodded again, pulling from her pocket a small crayon and a sheet of paper folded into quarters. She unfolded it and laid it on the table, a scribbled drawing. Lucy leaned forward. In the picture was a room, a kitchen, and a figure lying flat beneath a tiled floor. The tiles were shaded gray, and the man was drawn face down with no eyes or nose, just a dark, shadowy human form. "Who is this, Anna?" "That's Daddy," the girl replied. Lucy closed her eyes for a moment. "What is Daddy doing?" "Daddy's under the floor. Where the new tiles are. He's very cold." Lucy tilted her head gently. "Who told you that?" "I heard it," Anna said. "Daddy called me. I dreamed he was shivering and saying, 'Anna, I'm so cold.'" Outside, Carol sat beside Mark, who had arrived to check in on the situation. "She hasn't said much," Carol sighed. "But my granddaughter, she knows. More than we imagined." Mark sat in silence, his gaze thoughtful. "I once asked Anna, 'Where's your dad?' and she answered without flinching, with a brutal kind of truth." Carol turned to him, her voice cracking. "A 4-year-old child shouldn't have to live in that kind of truth, Chief." Mark nodded. "I know." Back in the therapy room, Lucy continued gently. "Who put Daddy under the floor?" "Mommy," Anna said, her tone like she was telling a fairy tale. "What did Mommy do to Daddy?" "Mommy told him, 'Be quiet.' Then she picked up the pan. She hit him hard. Daddy stopped moving." Lucy quickly jotted down some notes. "Were you scared?" Anna looked down. "I wasn't allowed to be scared. Mommy said if I told anyone, the whole family would fall apart. Then she cried. I was scared of her crying." Lucy put her pen down and took a deep breath. This was a clear case of post-traumatic stress disorder. The girl hadn't just witnessed a death, she had been forced into silence. A weight far too heavy for a 4-year-old child to bear. That night, back at Carol's home, Anna returned from her therapy session. She didn't eat much dinner. Instead, she sat and quietly drew. Carol tiptoed over to see. In the picture was a man, this time standing beside a small girl holding a balloon. "Who is this, sweetheart?" "That's Daddy," Anna replied. "He's not cold anymore. He has a balloon." Carol was speechless, hugging her granddaughter tightly. But that night, while Anna slept, she cried in her dreams, calling out, "Don't leave me, Daddy. Don't let Mommy shut the door." Carol held her through the night, unable to close her eyes for even a minute. The next morning, Dr. Lucy arrived at the police station at Rose Martin's request to provide a psychological assessment. "I can't bring the child in as a formal witness," Lucy began. But Anna's statements are highly consistent and matched the facts uncovered during the investigation. She described the timeline, the location of the body, and Martha Grant's actions with precise detail. Rose asked, "Does she show signs of fear toward her mother?" "Not a typical fear," Lucy replied. "It's fear of losing love, fear of betraying her mother. Children often still believe their mothers love them, no matter what they've done." Mark asked, "Can we use her drawings as a form of emotional evidence in court?" Lucy thought for a moment. "Legally, no. But emotionally and socially, they carry weight. If the court agrees, I can testify as an expert witness to explain the psychological impact this event had on the child." Rose nodded. "I'll request the drawings be added to the case file." That afternoon, a journalist named Scott Vincent, known for his investigative reporting, approached Mark with a proposal. "Chief Rivers, I've heard about the Martha Grant case. I'd like to write a feature story. I won't name the child. I just want the public to understand that some children get pulled into crimes no one notices." Mark considered. "As long as you don't cause Anna any more harm, you may access non-confidential information." Scott nodded. "I'd like to title it Dad Under the Kitchen Floor, A Child's Truth for Real Story Diary." Mark looked at him for a long moment and said softly, "Write it with your heart, not just your pen." At the detention center, Martha received her daughter's psychological report, delivered by her attorney, Victor Anderson. "The girl is undergoing long-term therapy. She still calls you mommy, but her sleep is filled with nightmares. She says you hit her dad with a pan, that you told her to stay silent." Martha's hands trembled. She remembers. Victor was blunt. "She doesn't just remember, she draws it, every tile, every word you said. What have you left your daughter, Martha, besides a childhood buried in concrete?" Martha bit her lip until it bled but didn't respond. Late that night, Mark sat alone in his office. On his desk was a stack of Anna's drawings, all of kitchen floors, burlap sacks, a figure lying down, or shadowy shapes. He gently touched one page, a drawing of two people, a little girl crying, and an adult slumped beside her. In the corner of the page, Anna had written in wobbly letters, "I miss Daddy." Mark sighed and wrote in his investigation journal, "It's not just adults who carry pain. Sometimes the smallest ones bear the heaviest truths, and they, more than anyone, are the first to name evil with the most honest voice. Daddy is under the kitchen floor." 4 days after Martha was officially indicted, Mark's investigation team received a detailed financial report from the Central Bank of the state of Illinois. The file was over 50 pages long, listing all of Martha Grant's transactions during the 3 months leading up to the crime. Richard Monroe flipped through each page. He frowned when he saw a repeated pattern of cash withdrawals, always at 2 a.m., the same time Martha claimed she couldn't sleep and went grocery shopping. But no store was open at that hour. "She wasn't shopping," Richard said firmly. "She was paying someone or buying materials off the books." Mark nodded. "Crosscheck with ATM machine locations near her home. Look for surveillance cameras within a 3 kilometers radius." 3 hours later, a young officer named Nathan Rogers returned with footage from an ATM just 2 blocks from Martha's house. In it, Martha wore a hat and dark glasses, withdrawing over $8,000 in cash at 2:16 a.m., exactly 3 days before Julian went missing. Mark looked at Richard. "Cash? No trail." In the middle of the night, she was preparing for something no one could know about. Richard added, "or preparing for a life without Julian." Prosecutor Rose Martin expanded the investigation by sending an official request to the Federal Property Registry. They needed to confirm the ownership of the house Martha and Julian lived in. The report came back. The house was fully owned by Julian, inherited from his father, and listed in his name prior to the marriage. Martha had no legal claim to it. Mark reviewed the document and said gravely, "The motive is glaring. If Julian divorced her, she would lose the house, the child, everything. Murder was the only way to keep it all." Rose nodded. "We also need to examine her relationship with Samuel Brooks more closely. Even if he wasn't directly involved, he may have been an emotional catalyst." Samuel Brooks was summoned a second time. This time, there was no coffee, no water, no smiles. Mark and Rose sat across from him in a cold gray room lit by harsh fluorescent lights. "We've reviewed your phone," Rose began. "There are hundreds of messages between you and Martha. In one, she says, 'I'll be free soon. Wait for me.' And you replied, 'Don't do anything you'll regret.'" Samuel swallowed hard. "I didn't know about the murder." "But you knew Julian was filing for divorce," Mark pressed. "Yes. Martha told me. She said Julian was going to take Anna. She was breaking down. I thought she just needed someone to talk to. I didn't know. I didn't think. Did she promise you anything?" Rose asked directly. Samuel lowered his head. She said if Julian was gone, she'd sell the house. She needed money to move to Boston with me. Mark slammed his palm on the table. So she killed him for the house, then planned to start over with you. Samuel trembled. I didn't know it would go that far. I swear. Back at the station, Rose requested a thorough investigation into digital bank accounts, especially cryptocurrency transactions. Nathan uncovered a hidden wallet where Martha had transferred up to $16,000 nearly a week after Julian had been reported missing. Richard lit a cigarette and stepped outside the station. Mark followed him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Unbelievable, Richard exhaled a stream of smoke. She didn't kill in a fit of rage. She planned it. A meticulous plan. Not just planned, Mark said slowly. She turned her only child into an unwilling witness. She didn't just kill Julian. She stole Anna's entire childhood. That evening, Carol sat reading the case files with her private attorney, Alan Parker, a longtime family friend. Do you want to pursue full legal custody? He asked. It's not about wanting, it's about needing to, Carol replied. I won't let my granddaughter be returned to that woman. Not ever. Alan nodded cautiously. Criminal and civil custody cases are often separate. But in this case, with the existing evidence, we can coordinate them. You'll need to testify at the custody hearing. Carol nodded. I'll do whatever it takes for Anna. 3 days later, during a closed hearing between the prosecution and the presiding judge, Rose officially requested additional charges, coercing a minor to remain silent and manipulating a child's testimony. Based on the child's statements, her drawings, and the psychological report from Dr. Lucy Bennett, the defendant threatened her daughter even after committing the crime in order to cover it up, Rose explained. The judge asked, is the psychological impact on the child evident? Rose replied, this child is 4 years old, Your Honor, and yet she has carried a secret that most adults would be terrified to bear. If that isn't harm, I don't know what is. Mark added, we also asked the court to consider financial fraud committed post-homicide, specifically actions to illegally appropriate the victim's estate. The judge nodded. I approve the additional charges. The case will be tried under the special aggravated category. A week later, Dr. Lucy brought Anna to a group therapy session. There were 4 other children in the room, each carrying a different kind of pain. One had lost a father in an accident. Another had been abandoned by their mother. Lucy encouraged the kids to draw the place where they feel safest. Anna drew a picture that included her grandmother, her teddy bear, Peepo, and a chair next to a window. But in the bottom right corner, there was still a black figure lying under the floor. Lucy sat beside her. Who's that, sweetheart? That's Daddy, Anna replied. Where is Daddy now? Daddy's resting. But he told me not to worry. He said, you did the right thing, Anna. Because of you, I won't be forgotten. Lucy bit her lip, eyes misting. She wrote in her treatment journal, no one is born to carry the secret of a death. But Anna, with her innocent words, Daddy is under the kitchen floor, opened the door to justice. She is not just a witness. She is the first light in the darkest room. At the detention center, Martha received devastating news. Samuel Brooks had been charged with concealing information and aiding after the fact, even though he hadn't participated in the murder. She slammed her hand against the wall, screaming, he promised he'd be there for me. A guard, Stella Roberts, looked at her coldly. You killed your husband, manipulated your daughter, and now you're blaming your lover. Martha glared back, her voice low and fierce. I did it because I didn't want to lose everything. Stella smirked. And now you've lost it all. That afternoon, Martha Grant was summoned for a 4th interrogation. She wore a thin windbreaker, her eyes more sunken than before, but her expression still carried a trace of defiance. Mark entered first, followed by Rose and Martha's attorney, Victor Anderson. Mark began, we've confirmed your financial transactions over the 3 months leading up to Julian's death. You borrowed $18,800 from him, correct? Yes, Martha answered without hesitation. For my own business. But there's no company, no license, no registered partner, Rose said icily. And after Julian disappeared, that money was transferred to an anonymous crypto wallet. I was afraid they'd take it back, Martha whispered. No, Victor interjected. I advise my client not to answer any further without my approval. Martha glanced at Victor, then gave a bitter laugh. A lawyer can save your life, but not your name. Mark continued calmly, we also discovered frequent communication between you and a man, Samuel Brooks. An ambiguous relationship repeated throughout hidden messages. You called him my runaway angel. That's personal, Martha said, lips trembling. No, Martha, Rose cut in. When your husband gets struck in the head, stuffed into a bag, and buried under the kitchen floor, nothing is personal anymore. Rose then presented a forensic handwriting analysis, comparing Martha's writing with threatening notes found in Julian's journal. The conclusion, the handwriting matched, including pressure, consistency, and distinctive looped shapes belonging to the same person. One note stood out, if you leave me, I'll make sure you have no one left to leave. Mark read it aloud, then closed his eyes. This wasn't a sudden emotion. It was a structured plan. On the morning of November 14, the state of Illinois Provincial Court opened the preliminary hearing in the case of Martha Grant murdering her husband, Julian Grant, one of the most shocking cases of the year. Although it was only the first hearing, dozens of reporters, journalists, and citizens filled the courthouse lobby. As the courtroom doors opened, all eyes turned to the woman in a light gray prison uniform, Martha Grant. She didn't bow her head, didn't hide her face. She walked straight ahead, her gaze cold. Beside her was attorney Victor Anderson, his expression tense but professional. Mark Rivers and prosecutor Rose Martin were already seated. In the public gallery, Carol held Anna tightly in her arms. The little girl wore a white dress and clutched her teddy bear, Peepo. No one had required her to be there, but Anna had said, I want to be at the trial for Daddy. The court bell rang. Presiding Judge John Harris, a stern man of Grenadian descent known for his strictness, struck his gavel. We begin with the prosecution's statement. Rose rose to her feet, her gaze sharp as a blade. Your Honor, members of the court, today we present not just a murder case, but an act of betrayal in its cruelest form. A wife who killed her husband as he turned his back, then buried him beneath the kitchen floor where their little daughter still sat every morning to eat her cereal. The room fell completely silent. We have conclusive evidence, the defendant's threatening messages to the victim, extracted video showing the violent act with a blunt object, financial records indicating suspicious cash withdrawals and untraceable transfers, and above all, the testimony of the victim's young daughter, who unknowingly revealed the entire truth with one simple sentence, Daddy is under the kitchen floor. Rose turned toward the jury. We cannot let this child grow up in a world where silence after murder can be weaponized, especially the silence of a child. Soft applause echoed from the back row. Judge Harris struck his gavel. Order. Victor rose and walked to the center of the courtroom. I do not deny that what Martha did was wrong, but I ask the court to understand some people are pushed to their limits. Martha was controlled by Julian, emotionally abused for years. She acted in a state of psychological breakdown, terrified of losing her child, her home, her entire life. She is not a cold-blooded killer. She is a desperate mother. Whispers rippled through the room. Rose stood abruptly. If Martha feared losing her child, why did she do the one thing that guaranteed Anna would lose both parents? Victor didn't reply. He lowered his head, then said, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to present the child's testimony, interpreted by her psychologist through a drawing that captures a child's truth about the incident. Rose did not object. A police officer placed the drawing on an easel in the center of the courtroom. It showed a man lying beneath a tiled floor, unevenly stacked tiles surrounding him. Beside him stood a woman holding what resembled a frying pan, and next to her, a little girl stood crying. The entire courtroom fell into silence. Judge Harris asked, Was this drawing made by the child after the incident? Yes, Your Honor. It was created during a therapy session without any guidance. And beneath the picture, she wrote, Mommy said to be quiet, but I still heard Daddy say he was cold. Martha lowered her head. She no longer dared look at the drawing. Carol leaned toward Anna and whispered through tear-filled eyes, "You've told the whole world what kind of man your father was." Midway through the hearing, the judge permitted psychologist Dr. Lucy Bennett to take the stand as an expert witness. She stood before the court, composed yet clearly moved. Anna is suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Despite being only 4 years old, she described the sequence of events with details that match forensic findings. Most notably, she said, "Mommy hit hard. Daddy didn't speak anymore. Mommy said I had to be quiet." A member of the jury asked, "Do you believe a child that age could have imagined such things?" Lucy answered firmly, "No. A 4-year-old cannot construct such accurate depictions unless they directly witnessed it or heard it so clearly that it became etched into memory." The judge nodded. "Thank you, Doctor." While the child's testimony cannot be used as formal legal evidence, it will be noted as a critical social factor in this case. The hearing extended into late afternoon. At last, Martha was invited to make her final statement. She rose and walked slowly to the center of the courtroom, her eyes no longer sharp, but hollow and indescribably vacant. "I have no defense left. I used to think I was the victim. But when I saw my daughter holding her teddy bear and drawing pictures of a corpse, I no longer feel worthy of calling myself a mother." Mark looked at Martha, then turned away. Richard closed his eyes. Rose tightened her grip on the table. Martha looked toward Anna. "You did the right thing, Anna. I was wrong. I'm sorry." She bowed her head. "I accept every sentence. I only ask, please don't send my daughter back to that house." Judge Harris struck the gavel. This court session is hereby concluded. The defendant, Martha Grant, is charged with the following crimes: first-degree murder, concealment of a corpse, financial fraud in pursuit of unlawful inheritance, and most severely, coercing a minor to withhold testimony and causing direct psychological harm to a child. After a full review of physical evidence, financial records, video footage, eyewitness testimony, including psychological evaluations, and all actions pertaining to the concealment of the body, coercion of a minor, and fraudulent financial conduct. He paused. This court finds the defendant, Martha Grant, guilty of first-degree murder, concealment of a corpse, manipulation of a minor, and attempted fraudulent acquisition of assets. Rose Martin gave a subtle nod, while Victor Anderson, Martha's defense attorney, lowered his head in acceptance. For the totality of these charges, the defendant is sentenced to life imprisonment. Custody of the child shall be permanently granted to Mrs. Carol Morgan, the victim's mother, as recommended by the Child Protection Agency, and based on the provisional ruling issued last month. A faint breath of relief echoed through the courtroom gallery. Martha showed no reaction, only bowed her head, her eyes red, and her lips pressed tight. Judge Harris continued, his tone low and steady. "Finally, allow me a personal note, something rarely said by a judge in this courtroom. Little Anna, though only 4 years old, spoke the words that unlocked this entire case. 'Daddy is under the kitchen floor' was not the phrase of a naive child, but the truth spoken by the smallest and most fragile among us. She rescued her father from being forgotten and saved herself." He looked directly at Anna. "Thank you, Anna." The little girl looked up at him and replied softly, "Thank you for listening to me." The media exploded following the verdict. On the front page of the New York Times the next morning, a bold headline appeared, "Justice from a Child's Voice, Anna Grant in the murder case that shook the state of Illinois." The article by journalist Scott Vincent, published by Real Story Diary, detailed the path of the investigation, but dedicated much of its space to one single idea: the raw, unconscious power of a child's testimony. One excerpt was quoted more than any other. "We often say children don't understand, but Anna proved that some truths can only be spoken by children because they haven't yet learned how to lie." Meanwhile, at the State of Illinois Women's Correctional Facility, Martha Grant was officially transferred to Isolation Block 3. Warden Stella Roberts, who had overseen Martha throughout her detainment, handed over her personal belongings, just a few trivial items and an old photo. Martha picked up the photo, a picture of her and Julian on their wedding day, before Anna was born. She sat in silence for hours, holding the frame, lips sealed. Stella quietly stepped closer, her voice low. "You had everything: husband, daughter, a home. But you traded it all just to keep something you ended up losing. Martha said nothing. At the city social services office, Carol arrived to finalize her legal guardianship of Anna. Her hands trembled as she signed the paperwork. An official named Philip Newton handed her the folder. "Congratulations, ma'am. The court has granted you permanent custody of Anna. She will enter long-term therapy and attend a new school in a safer area." Carol was too emotional to speak. She simply held Anna's hand tighter. "Where would you like Anna to go to school?" Philip asked. Carol thought for a moment, then smiled. "Somewhere with grass, sunlight, and plenty of art supplies." 2 weeks later, Anna officially enrolled at St. Mary's Preschool, a small school in a quiet town nearly 40 kilometers from the state of Illinois. There, no one knew her past. She wasn't Martha Grant's daughter or the witness to the murder. She was simply a new student. On her first morning, Anna walked into the classroom with Peepo the teddy bear in hand. The teacher, Mary Evans, knelt down and asked softly, "What's your name, sweetie?" "Anna," she replied. "And this is my friend, Peepo." Mary smiled gently. "Peepo can learn with you." The class giggled. Anna hesitated, then smiled back. For the first time in many months, her eyes sparkled. At a post-trial therapy session, Dr. Lucy Bennett met with Anna again. She brought along a blank sketch pad. "Today, we're going to draw the people who make you feel safe. Remember?" Anna nodded, gripping her crayon with focus. She drew in silence for over 10 minutes. When she finished, she held it up, a picture of an elderly woman with silver hair hugging a little girl and a teddy bear named Peepo. Beside them stood a man smiling, holding a red balloon. Lucy pointed to the man. "Who's this?" "Daddy," Anna answered. "Daddy comes back in my dreams. He smiles and tells me not to be afraid anymore. He says I'm the bravest person he's ever known." Lucy choked up. She nodded gently. "You're a hero, Anna." Anna smiled softly, then turned to Peepo and said, "Daddy isn't cold anymore because now he's in my heart." That evening, in the backyard of their small house in the new town, Carol stood quietly watching Anna ride her bike around the yard. Laughter echoed, pure and bright, through the peaceful space. Frances Davis, the former neighbor who once brought Anna to the police station, had come to visit. She placed a hand on Carol's shoulder. "You did it," Frances whispered. "That little girl is truly alive again." Tears welled in Carol's eyes. She lost her father, but at least she doesn't have to live in darkness anymore. Frances looked at Anna, then turned to Carol. "And you saved a child with love. No one is more worthy to raise her than you." Late that night, Mark Rivers sat alone in his office. A final report on the Martha Grant case in front of him. He placed Anna's drawing, the courtroom copy, on the shelf. A small slip of paper was clipped beneath it, scrolled in wobbly handwriting, "Daddy is under the kitchen floor, but now he's in my dreams." Mark exhaled deeply and murmured, "Justice isn't locking someone away. Justice is when the innocent get to keep living without fear." 2 years after the trial that shocked the state of Illinois, Anna Grant was now 6 years old. Her hair was shoulder-length, braided into 2 neat pigtails, and her large black eyes no longer carried the panic they once held. Each morning, she wore a small backpack with a cat on it and held Carol's hand on the way to school. Today was a special class day, free drawing day. Ms. Mary Evans passed out paper and crayons, then told the class, "Today, let's draw the person you love most." Anna didn't speak. She just smiled and quietly picked the colors red, blue, and yellow. While other children drew families, pets, superheroes, or princesses, Anna drew a simple scene, a little girl standing next to a tall man holding a red balloon. The two were looking up at the sky. "All done," Anna said, holding up her drawing. Ms. Evans leaned in and gently asked, "Who's this?" "That's Daddy," Anna replied. "What is Daddy doing?" "He's watching me grow up. In the drawing and in my dreams." That afternoon, Carol came early to pick Anna up. The two walked hand in hand through the park, passing a stone bench where Julian used to sit and read every weekend. Carol said nothing, just looked at her granddaughter, gently holding her hand. Grandma, Anna said suddenly. Is it true that people never really die if we still remember them? Carol flinched slightly. Why do you ask that, sweetheart? Because I dreamed Daddy was standing on a cloud, Anna said. He waved at me and said, "Thank you for not being afraid to tell the truth." Then he floated up, but his shadow stayed. Carol's voice trembled. Yes, your daddy is still here in your heart. And in every drawing, every dream. Anna squeezed her grandmother's hand tightly. I'll never forget Daddy. That night, Anna wrote in her diary, "People think I'm too little to understand, but I do. I know how to keep Daddy with me. Not by holding his hand, but by remembering. Daddy used to be so cold. But now he's not cold anymore. Because he lives in my smile every day." This story reminds us that truth always finds a voice, even when it comes from a 4-year-old child. With one seemingly innocent sentence, "Daddy is under the kitchen floor," Anna shattered a silence full of darkness and brought justice to her father. From her, we learned that the feelings and words of children should never be dismissed, because sometimes they see what adults have chosen to ignore. Love, timely care, and faith in justice are what can rescue a small soul from the shadows. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel, Real Story Diary. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.